Okay, Patron, so another Q&A. First of all, thank you for your support so much and for your questions. And there are so many questions, and that's great. Thank you so much. But I thought it will be a better idea, basically, to divide this into two different videos. So I will do a short video with some of the questions on YouTube. And I will do the full video, all of the questions. I will put this on Patreon and on the Patreon YouTube channel. So all of you can see this. I will place this. I will post this for all tiers, of course, so everyone can go and watch it, because it's going to be a long one. Yes, so you will be able to watch everything, and on YouTube I will put some things that some of the questions that I think maybe people will find helpful or interesting, or I don't know. We will see. But again, thank you so much for your support and for the questions. I will just mention that come join us. If you are not on Discord, come join us on Discord. First of all, the community is also there. It's much easier to communicate with one another there, and also with me. I'm much more available there than on Patreon. And also there are monthly challenges with giveaways. And PathSet, this is one of the modules, commercial modules from PathSet, is donating his modules for now, last month, 2 months ago, this month as well, donating his commercial modules for the giveaways, for the challenges, so you can also win his commercial collections, one of my courses you can get, and so on and so forth. I will just mention this is not a competition. I'm choosing one submission at random, so all of you can participate and have fun and enjoy the challenges. So come join us also on Discord. Again, thank you for your support. Thank you for your questions, and let's start. So the first question is coming from Derek. Hi, Derek. Since you enjoy using Veli's plateau so much indeed, I'd love to see you turn it into a gated reverb if you haven't done so before. I'm curious to see how you would achieve this. So I just released a quick tip video about exactly this, about gating a reverb with plateau. So I will put a link to this in the description, and there is also another video on Patreon, a full video about using plateau more as a sound design tool and not only as a send reverb. So if you're interested, again, I will put links in the description and also on Patreon. But let me quickly show you how you can do this. Right, so here I have a kick, hi-hat, and snare. Gate sequencer is sequencing tremor 2, kick and hi-hat, and tremor 1 is the snare. Right, and you can see tremor 1, or this snare sound, let me solo it maybe, is going through plateau. For now it's all the way dry, but if I bring in the wet amount, right, basically we get this reverb. It has lots of decay, that's why it's like resonating a bit. Right, but now there is the clear function that I can use to clear the buffer. Right, and I can trigger it, or I can use also a gate or a trigger, right, to trigger this, and by that basically get a gated reverb effect. So I have here another row on the gate sequencer that I'm going to use. Right, and I got basically a gated reverb, again, just by using the clear function on plateau. Right, of course this can work also on melodic voices. So here I have board L, sequencing, energy. All of the patches will be available also on Patreon to download if you're interested and you want to download them. Right, energy again through plateau in this case, but I'm using a Euclidean sequencer, so a different sequencer to trigger the clear function, right, just to get more interesting results. Let's solo this. Right, you can get rhythmic results by gating this clear function. Right, now you can also do this in a different way, sort of like side chaining the reverb. The thing is, the positive thing about the clear function is that it will remove everything from the buffer, so you start every time new, which can be much cleaner. But you can also side chain the reverb like I'm doing here. I have here a sort of a clap with noise. basically. Right, and again, this is going through plateau. A copy of this is going to plateau, and I'm sidechaining plateau with an inverted envelope, right? So basically I have here an envelope that I'm inverting, and it will sound like this, right? Again, just to get rhythmic results, so everything together will sound like this. The next question is coming from Craig. Hi Craig, it would be good if you could show some examples of looping techniques. So I guess you mean in VCA. If not, let me know and I will see what I can do about it. But I have a full video about live looping in VCA, how you can loop all sorts of different ways. I will put a link somewhere for this so you can have a look. But still I want to show you something that I really like doing. And this is looping with delays. Basically you set a delay to 100% feedback, and it will always continuously, endlessly loop what you record, what you play into it. And since it's a delay, each delay has different features, and also the more you record into it, the more the crunchy the sound will become. And you can create all sorts of different effects with it by changing the delay times and stuff like this. So it can be really interesting using a delay as a looper. So what I have here, let me just connect this to Chronoblob. For now, Chronoblob is all the way down. I have here an instrument that I created. It's also available on Patreon. I created this. This is for Decent Sampler, which is free. It's also available as an app on iPhones and stuff like this. This I created with the neutron and some granular synthesis, so it will sound like this. Right, so this is what I will loop. And again, now it's going to Chronoblob 2 all the way dry. So let me bring it up. Right, and now the feedback I'm going to put at 100%, and now it will always continuously loop. So I can just play, right, I can just play a few notes onto it. Right, and you see it's just continues looping it. And of course you can change the delay time. So if I bring the feedback down for a second, right, and again 100%, if I bring this all the way up, you see there is like 2.7 seconds of basically delay, which will basically be the looper, right? So now I can again do this, no hands, right? It just continues looping this. And I can add to it an overdub and overdub. Right, and again it will just continue looping. Which is really cool, especially if you start now changing the delay time, for example, you will get this effect that will also get in the loop. You hear it? And of course this will work with other delays as well. Here I have the Tap Dancer from Flag, which is a lovely, lovely delay. Let me change the BPM to the slowest. Maybe I can change this even slower. Let's see. No. Wait a minute. No, this is just for incoming clock. Okay, so now this is the slowest delay. Of course, there is drive and everything. Just take the feedback all the way up. Right, and now I can continue. Right? This will be Tap Dancer. There is also modulation here on the to add this tape-like effect. Quite cool. Also built-in filter. Also drive, so I can record things with drive. Right, even more. Oh yeah. Right, and like this you can create textures and all sorts of different interesting results. Right, and then you take the mix all the way up, so you have just the loop. And this will basically continue looping, of course, experiment with different delays. If you meant in hardware, this will work amazing also in hardware. Something like the Mimeophone, for example, can be a looper. Chronoblob 2 is also available in hardware, of course. Yeah, experiment with this. Of course, Magneto is a looper, but is also a delay. So it works more or less the same. Yeah, so experiment with delays and see what results you are getting. The next one is coming from Kevin. Hi Kevin, I am interested in understanding how to use the strummer in Orange Line's Gator as well as the strummer in Nischi. Alright, so let's start with the one from Nischi. Basically what you have here, you have a sort of a burst generator. So you trigger it and it will create a burst of triggers. This is already a hint that you can also use other modules for this. Right, so what we have here? We have here the strum global, so you can trigger it and you can see here, have a look here on the lights. You will see that they go from up and down, basically triggering 6 outputs, like 6 strings on a guitar, for example. Right, but there is no global output that will sum all of them, so you have to mix them, I guess. Now you can mix them with a mixer. In VCA this will work great. You can also use Logic if you want, but with the mixer it will be the easiest. Right, so first of all I'm going to mix them so I can send them all to one voice. Of course, you can also create like different voices being triggered from different outputs, right? So you can have 6 different voices and strum them like this. But I'm going to use one voice. The voice is FM operator, and the super sample and hold will generate the notes. Right, so I'm going to trigger the super sample and hold, so it will generate 6 notes and also the FM operator. And now I'm going to strum it. Right, and we created a burst of 6 triggers. We can change the timing, of course, the intervals between them. Right, I'm just clicking and dragging. There's also a CV input. Right, so this is one example. Another example is if you don't want to use random voltage, you can also use something like a switch. Right, so here I'm sending 6 different notes, C4, E flat 4, F4, and so on, to a sequential switch that is set with 6 steps. And strummer will basically switch between those notes. Again, I'm mixing it, right? And this is going once to the clock, so it will basically switch between the notes, and once also to the FM operator. Again, we can change the timing. And like this, you get always just the same notes. Right, another idea is to use polyphony. So instead of mixing things, you merge them into a polyphonic signal. And then you also get the notes to ring out. So here, instead of using a mixer, I'm using the merge module. This is triggering polyphonically the super sample and hold, which will polyphonically generate notes. And this is sequencing the FM operator, again, polyphonically, so it will sound like this. You hear it? Let's make this a bit slower. Right, so you can also do this, and there is also the possibility, basically what it should do is strum a chord, arpeggiate a chord. So here I'm using again polyphony, but instead of using random voltage, I'm using the chord module from Impromptu to generate a chord. In this case, there are 4 notes. You can use 5 notes, 3 notes, 6 notes, and so on. So you can experiment with this. And in this case, what you can do is also change the strumming direction. Just like on a guitar, you strum down, you strum up. So this can be also interesting. Let's make this a bit slower. Right, so now it will strum 4 voices of polyphony. Or I can go the other way around. Right, so this is basically more or less how Strummer works. Of course, you can experiment with different ideas. You can also use a burst generator instead, or you can use this to strum different voices and so on. So this is basically how you can use it. Now let's move on to Gator, right, that I have here. Now Gator is a bit more complicated, but still you can get really interesting results. So again, I'm going to strum a polyphonic chord or polyphonic voice, and you need to do a few things. So the easiest would be to use swing, because swing has the signals or the voltages we need. So first of all, we need to clock swing. So we have the clock input, which will come from the clock, the BPM input, which will come from the BPM output from clocked. Right, you can also connect the reset, of course. And then swing will output a phase clock, which is basically not a binary signal, like a clock signal, not square waves or pulse waves. It's basically a saw wave, sort of a phase clock, which is not so common in VCV. I'm not so sure why, but there are a few modules that work like this, right? So the phase clock will go to the phase input of Gator, then the comparator or the micro timing will go to the micro timing of Gator, and now Gator basically needs also a gate. Now, since I'm using here 4 channels of polyphony, again, this is a bit more complicated, but again, the results are interesting. So since I'm using 4 channels of polyphony, I have to use a 4-channel gate. Now the easiest will be to use polycon 8 because I can change the number of channels to 4, right? And basically bring the 4 channels up. So I have a gate that stays open and it has 4 channels of polyphony. Right, and now already we get the chord playing, and now I can start adding the strumming. Right, of course, up to a certain point. Right. So like this, basically, you can strum chords. You can do this also slower if you want. You can use a clock division. Right, but this is more or less how Gator works and how Strummer works. Again, you can experiment with this for a long time and also try using burst generators. Maybe you will get also interesting results. So the next question is coming from Peter. Hi, Peter. I would be interested in your strategies for free improvisation with VCV, Eurorec, and hybrid. Okay, so a few things. First of all, and this doesn't matter what instrument you use, learn and know your instrument, because the best thing you want to achieve is to disconnect your brain, disconnect logic from the sounds, right? And from your actions and from your feelings and from the moment, basically. And when you know your instrument, never mind if it's hardware, never mind if it's software, if you know your instrument, it will make it much easier for you to feel something during the performance, during the improvisation, and to reach for it without thinking, without activating the logic part of your brain of what I have to do, where is this button, which menu I have to go to, and which knob I have to turn, or which fader I have to push, or whatever. You don't have to think about this stuff. You just go and reach for it intuitively with feeling and not with your brain, although of course it's the same thing, but you know what I mean. And you just reach for it and you make the changes you want, you add the voices you want, and so on and so forth. So first of all, know your instrument or instruments. Second of all, and this is more for VCV and hybrid, because with just hardware it's a given, but tactile control, right? With your hands, with your fingers. This is really important, at least for me. If you want to improvise, it's much easier and much more fun to improvise when you can actually reach for stuff and not going and looking for it with the mouse, especially if it's on a screen. Because then you have to go and look, and you have just one hand that can do just one thing. If you have 2 hands with 10 fingers, you can move faders while turning knobs, while muting channels, and so on and so forth. Again, all of this without thinking if you know your instrument. But tactile control, get yourself a MIDI controller and basically build a sort of an instrument out of it and learn it. If you are using VCV, if it's for hybrid or just a VCV rack, build yourself a fixed track, a fixed set of modules. Of course, it will take you a few tries, but once you get it, learn it and experiment just with it. Build a sort of a MIDI controller according to the patch, right? And experiment with it and use it more and more and more until you reach the time that you want to do something and you just reach for it without thinking. And this will happen just when you don't change Opalach, don't change things so often, right? Because if you go to VCV and you start changing modules, maybe some modules you don't really know fully, or you have to map things to a MIDI controller and you are like, wait a minute, this fader is doing what now? I forgot. You know, when you have a fixed track, and a MIDI controller that you can trust and that you can assign and leave it as it is for a few times. You don't have to do this for a year, right? But a few times to learn it and to experiment and to see what you like, what you don't like. Then when you go and improvise, again, you disconnect the logic part of your brain and you are just there in the moment, in the sound. So this is another thing, tactile experience. Another thing, and this I did a lot when, so I had like sessions, hybrid sessions of hardware and VCV Rec where I performed live, and it was long performances. It's on YouTube. I will put a link if you want, and they are not amazing, but still it was mostly improvised. So what I did, and this I got also from Scanner, if you know Scanner, I thought about how more or less I would like to start and how more or less I would like to end. And I gave myself space in between to improvise and to go with the flow and to concentrate on the sounds and to concentrate on the performance and in improvising. Because if you know more or less, of course, how to start, you don't have this pressure of, okay, what do I do? You start something and the music carries you forward. And also when you want to end it, you know more or less how you want to end it. So when you feel, okay, I'm done, you know where to go. So you have your beginning and you have your end. I keep hitting the mic. You have your beginning and you have your end. And everything in between, you have space, you have a place for improvisation where you can just concentrate on improvising or not concentrate or letting go. This is also something important, just letting go. And like this, you can improvise. So we have learn your instrument, we have tactile experience, and we have also giving yourself space and place for improvisation by taking the pressure out of how to start and the pressure out of how to end and leaving yourself space in between. Another thing that was quite helpful, and that's a bit of the opposite of what I said at the beginning of know your instrument. But something that I found really helpful is not practicing a lot. So I had this setup. In this setup, I knew the instruments, the individual instruments, but I didn't practice the whole setup a lot. I practiced, or I thought about the beginning and the end, as I mentioned, but I didn't practice it because I didn't want to fall into repetitive patterns. I didn't want to fall in those comfortable traps. I wanted to give myself, again, it's about giving yourself space. So I wanted to give myself space to improvise. So I didn't practice a lot with the setup. I just made sure that everything is working, and I made sure that I have, and this is another tip, I'm sorry, it's a tip inside a tip. I made sure that I have enough sounds to work with, so I have things to reach out without changing so many things. Imagine if you have, I don't know, just two synthesizers, for example. When you want to change, when you want to improvise more, you have to change things a lot. So there is a lot of silence maybe, or there is a lot of pressure because you have to work one, but whilst changing another thing. When you have many, you will see this also in the videos if you have a look, that I have a big setup there, because I could just reach for stuff and improvise with them while other things are running. And I could take stuff out, take stuff in, bring stuff in, take stuff out, and so on. So again, I didn't practice a lot. I knew the instruments that I used, not perfectly, of course, but I knew them good enough so I can improvise. And also, I gave myself enough sounds to work with. This was hardware and VCV rack back in the time. I had the MIDI controller, the nano control from Korg, which was more than enough. And a few different synthesizers and instruments. Again, go have a look. It's a fun one. There were long sessions. I was stuck for a second. There were long sessions, like an hour and a half sometimes, or 2 hours even sometimes, that I just improvised. I knew the beginning. I knew more or less the beginning, more or less the end, and I improvised in between. So yes, those are my tips or strategies. Of course, there are many more. Most important is having fun, I guess. And that's it. The next one is from Golden Pyramid. Hi, Golden Pyramid. I've been trying to figure out this track by Florian Kupfer. Of course, I will put a link in the description to this track or somewhere on Patreon so you can also have a look, to create something similar for a dance performance. It seems like it's just 2-3 different minimal rhythmic elements mixed together. I think the one voice could be made with kick all probably. There is a lot of filtering on the hand drum sounds and some nice delay effects on the cymbal. I wonder if you can help me with any insight. So I did my best. As I mentioned always, this is not my strength. I'm not so good at recreating other people's music, unfortunately, but I always learn something, and it's always fun to experiment. So what I did is this. First of all, it sounded a bit like a sample of congos that is going on there. So this is exactly what I have here. I downloaded from Freesound a sample of congos, uploaded it into Simpliciter, and you can see I'm sequencing it. Of course, the patch will be available also on Patreon for you to download, so you can have a closer look. And then I have also Tremor 2 as a sort of a soft kick drum. There are 2 kick drums there that are quite interesting. So the first one is a sort of giving the rhythm together with a sort of a synth sound that I used kick all, not for kick, but for the synth sound. It sounds like this. Let me just open the filter for a second. Right? Basically, this is the rhythm. All of this is being mixed into a filter, a low-pass filter with lots of resonance. Right? Which is quite interesting. This is already something I want to experiment with more, just sending a few voices, percussive voices into a filter with lots of resonance. This is already quite interesting. Now there is also something there is like a pumping reverb somewhere in I couldn't make it exactly as I wanted to, but I have here a sidechained plateau. There is something there, something sidechained there, like a reverb, maybe not sidechain, maybe more gated or something. There is something going on there in the background. And then there is a kick. All of a sudden there's coming another kick drum or a bass drum that is not synced to anything. Basically it's playing unsynced, freely playing on top of all of this rhythm, very tight rhythm, I guess. And it's quite weird, but it gives this uneasy feeling, which is interesting. So I'm just using an LFO in this case that is not synced to anything to trigger another kick drum. Right? It's not synced in any way. Right? Maybe I'm just I don't know. I'm not hearing this correctly, but it sounds like this kick drum is not synced to anything. So this is what I added here. And another voice is this sort of cymbal that I try to recreate with Tremor. Is using, I guess, as a sample because it sounds really crispy. And this is going to a delay. Let me unmute this. A delay that I think is most of the time dry, and then sometimes it's bringing it in and playing with a delay time, so something like this. Right? Right, so again, you can map this to some sort of a MIDI controller or something like this and play with it. It's very minimal, quite interesting, also rhythmically, and that's it. I hope this was kind of helpful. Again, it's not my strength. I'm not so good at recreating stuff like this, recreating other people's sounds and music, but still, I think it was, for me, it was fun, but I think it's also interesting, and that's it. The next one is from Thomas. Hi, Thomas. I remember you used to have a video about Steve Reich's music techniques applied to VCV Rec. Yes, it's unlisted because it was just not too old and most modules were not available anymore, but I will revisit it indeed and we'll make a new one. I've been listening to a lot of music for 18 musicians this last month, and I wanted to make some patches inspired by it. I would love to hear your insights and ideas, even a full video on these techniques. Thank you. Thank you for your support. So yes, a full video will come for sure because it's really interesting, but I can show you two techniques, two phasing techniques, basically having two voices that are coming in and out of phase, which is basically what phasing is all about, right? So the first one I have here is with the sequencer. So I have two identical voices, right? 16-step sequencer sequencing the FM operator, and I have an oct that we will use later on. Now it sounds like this, stereo, but because it's exactly the same voice, you hear the same left and right, so it sounds in the middle. Right now, those are 16 steps, and already what you can do, you can set one sequencer to have 15 steps, right? So it will play once, and then every cycle it will be basically offset by one step, and this can get really interesting. So let me change this now to 15. Aha. Right, and then after 15 times it will be the same. Let's wait for it. Maybe we won't wait for it, maybe it's longer. Is it one more? Is it two more? I'm not so sure anymore. No, anyway, it will take a longer time for it to... I think the next one. Right, and then again it will be offsetted, or offset. Offsetted, is offsetted the word? Let's add also this modulation from oct, just to have a bit more movement in left and right. Right, so like this you can create phasing effect. Of course, this is just 16 steps. Imagine when you have a 64-step sequence, so you have 164, 163, amazing. It will take so long for them to sync up again, which can be quite interesting. And another technique you can use is with LFOs, right? So here I have two LFOs set to 4.4 hertz exactly. I can reset everything. Right, so they are set again exactly the same. This works in VCV Rec better because you can have exact values. And again, it's exactly the same voice already with the modulation set, but they are running basically now at the same rate, so it should sound like one voice in the center. But now I'm going to have one LFO set just a bit quicker than the first LFO. Slowly they will start phasing in and out of each other. So this was 4.4, so this will be 4.45, let's say. Right? You can make this even slower, of course, 4.41. Right, but you see already they are starting to phase out and you get two different voices or the same voice playing basically out of phase. Right, so this is another technique. Again, I hope that it will be soon that I will make a new video about this, because there are amazing techniques that you can use also in hardware quite nicely. That's it. So now we have two questions that are more or less the same. The first one is from James. Hi James, I'm interested in making a self-playing lead sequence in VCV. And another one is from Gerald. Hi Gerald, I would like to be able to patch a self-generating lead part that could be used for a lead solo. So let's see what I have here. Again, the patch will be available on Patreon for you to download so you can have a closer look, but let me show you quickly a few voices that I have here. So I have sorts of chords with Bordel sequencing the VCO, going through a fully wet plateau to get this chordy feel. Then there is a kick and hi-hat from Tremor 2 with tap dancer and plateau. Then I have a bass with Opulus. Right, again, just for context, so we have something that a lead sound can play on top, and you can have a closer look if you want to download the patch. And what I have here, the voice itself, the solo lead sound will be the FM operator, and I'm sending a copy of it to a bandpass filter and a delay just to add some movement, so it will sound like this. And this is for now just playing a drone, but the interesting thing is that you can use smooth random voltage to create notes that will create this sort of organic lead pitch changing sound, right? Because it's smooth and it's random. You send it to a quantizer to quantize it. It will look like this, right? The green trace, let me make this a bit seeable, right? The green trace is the smooth random voltage, and the yellow one is after the quantizer, so it will basically quantize it. So if I send, I'm using Walk from Bog Audio, which will send smooth random voltage. If this will go to the pitch input, right? And you can change the rate. Course, change also the scale and offset it so you get exactly the range of notes you want. So again, it will output smooth random voltage. You send this voltage through a quantizer and you get quantized solo lead sound or lead sequence basically. Right, now if you don't want it to play all the time, you can also add modulation or something for the level, right? So in this case, I'm using an envelope that is being gated like this, gated randomly, just to bring it in and out. Maybe we can have a bit more. Right, I can have more modulation for the feedback. Bit like someone is playing the keys, playing a solo on the keys or something like this. Right, and of course the sound design you can change. You can use all sorts of different voices for this. The FM operator is just a fully ready there for us to use. And this is quite nice. It sounds organic, it's not repetitive, it sounds like a solo. Yeah, so I hope this is helpful. Go experiment with this, experiment with different sound design ideas. But the idea is basically smooth random voltage. This will work with caudal also, for example, from Volt. Smooth random voltage through a quantizer and then to your voice, and play with the scale of this voltage so you have the range of the notes you want. And the rate also, you can also modulate it in a generative way or not, or you can play it with the hand and get all sorts of different interesting results. This one is from Marcus. Hi Marcus, I love the sound of the Indian Tanpura, the droning string instrument. I would love to synthesize something a little bit like that in VCV Rec 2. Any ideas of tips, thanks in advance. So I have something built here. Let's listen to this first, and then I will walk you through what I did here. So it will sound like this. Right, sounds very string-like in my opinion. I just will mention that I have here delay and reverb that for now are all the way off, so they were not a part of this sound for now. And let's see what's going on here. So I have basically two different voices. So I'm playing this with the keyboard. Let me just make something like this, right? So when I think about string instruments, I always have carpless strong in mind, which is a burst of noise going into a delay with high feedback, and so on and so forth. So here I did something a bit similar. So I'm using the resonator, I'm using rings in the sympathetic strings mode. Right, sympathetic strings are basically the strings that will resonate without you playing on them. Right, they will just add this drony feel to everything. And I'm sending a burst of noise, a burst of pink noise into the input of rings as well, right, to give this tech. Let's listen just to this for a second. It will be this one. And let's take this one also off. Just a second. This one also off. All right, so it's this. It's a bit low on volume, but I can bring it up maybe. Right, so this already gives this sort of a string-like feel, and then I use also rescomp from Vult, which is it's a comp filter, but basically comp filters are delays, and this comp filter has also volt per octave, so I can also play it with notes. Right, so this will be this one. Let's see this. Right, it gives a bit more of high end, I guess. And then what I'm doing, so let's bring this back down. And then what I'm doing, if I will mix it again, let's see just a second. Right, so then I mix them together. Right, and then I mix them together, and they are going once directly to a mixer, and then they are going also once to a formant filter. This one is from Squinky Labs, to add this vowel-like movement to the sound, which will do this. I have also a random modulation here coming from Walk. Right, you can see this here moving, the green ones moving between the vowels, and this will add this, this sound. Right, and then layering them together. Right, it gives this feel, this, I mean, it's not perfect, of course, but you can tweak it and see what results you like more. You can also tweak rings, right? The brightness and the dampening, the decay and the position, and also the envelope for the noise you can tweak and get different results. So of course this will be available on Patreon if you want to download it. And just for fun, I have here a delay, just for fun, really, delay and reverb. Right, just for fun. So this is what I came up with the Tanpura. Let me know if you get better results. Okay, this one is from Thomas. Hi Thomas, thanks a lot for all your work. Thank you for the support. It helps me a lot using VCV and my Eurorack together. Perfect. My question is about Gate Sequencer 64 by Improv 2. I am struggling with advanced gate feature, trigger and gate length. Would you a bit elaborate on how to use the gate type buttons as per pictogram? I assume that we can use a variable type of gates. However, I manage only to set probability. I'm wondering if we can change gate type per trigger. So yes, let me show you how this works. Basically, there are the so-called advanced gate modes on the gate sequencer. Right, so here I have it going with the normal clock, triggering the FM operator. Right, and now I want to add these gates here, right? I can add triplets, I can add sorts of ratchets, I can move the gates back and forth. Now for this we need a higher clock resolution, which means that now the clock resolution is each step is one gate, is one PPQN, pulses per quarter note. It's one pulse per quarter note. Per clock, it will move one step forward. Now we need more than this, because if you want one step to have 3 pulses inside, right, we have to use a larger PPQN. So let's first of all get in the modes. So you see here it says length mode and it says hold for clock resolution. Now have a look. If I click and hold it, right, we go now in the clock modes. Now it's again multiplied by 1, which means that it's 1 PPQN. Again, I will have to hold and click because it goes out of it. Right, if I go to 2 or to 4, actually you see there are some lights here turning on, which means that when I'm in 4 PPQN, in clock resolution of 4 PPQN, I can use these modes here. Now to use this 4 PPQN, we have to use a higher clock resolution with the clock. You can see now the sequencer runs quite slowly, actually 4 times slower, right? Which means that if we choose a clock resolution of 4, we have to use also a quicker clock, a clock of multiplied by 4. And now we will have the same speed as before, but we can start adding these gates here, right? So I can choose, for example, this note and choose this gate. Let's see what happens. Right? So now instead of playing 1 pulse, it played 2. Right? I can also move, right? So this will be the default, right? And then I can move it. Instead that it will play on the first half, it will play on the second half, right? So let's do it for this one, right? Right, so it played, instead of playing the first half, it played the second half, right? And then another note, so it sounds again like 2 notes or 2 hits. Right, now what if you want to use the other ones, the other gates modes? So they are triplets, which means that you need a clock resolution that will divide by 3. So if it's 6, 12, 24, and so on. 24? Maybe not 24. No, 24 as well, yeah. Because it's 2 times 12. Right, so you have 4. If I go to 6, you see these light up, but those turned off because you cannot use them because you need a clock resolution of 8 or 4 and so on. So the best will be to have a clock resolution of 12, right? Because then all of them are on. But again, now you have to use a clock multiplication of 12 because you have a higher clock resolution. So you have clock resolution of 12. And now here, for example, I can add a triplet. Right, I can choose it. Right? Instead of 1 pulse, it played 3 in the length of 1. Again, we have a higher clock resolution, which means that we have more pulses per step. You can you can insert more pulses, like 3 pulses instead of 1, right? With a clock resolution of 12. Now, usually I don't use, in this case, I'm using it was multiplied by 1 clock, the original run, right? Usually I use a multiplied by 2 or multiplied by 4. So what if you want now to use a multiplied by 4? You have to multiply this by 4, which will be 48. Right? Or multiplied by 2, which will be 24. Right, let's add another voice here. I have here also kick all, right? And let's enter a few notes. right? And then here, for example, I can add again something like this, and maybe here another double pulse, right? Maybe have right. So again, you click and hold. You choose the clock resolution. In my opinion, 12 is the best because you have all of the lights, and then you have to multiply the clock. If you multiply it by 12, you get basically a multiplied by 1 clock. If you multiply it by 24, you get a multiplied by 2. If you multiply it by 48, you get a multiplied by 4. I hope it makes sense, but basically the clock resolution you use inside the gate sequencer will be the clock multiplication you use in the clock module that you are using. Right, I have here another one, another voice just for fun. This will be this one here, some noise. Right, so I can do this. Right, and again add some ratcheting and all sorts of different different effects. Right, and here you have also gate lengths, right? Right, so like this you can add ratchets, you can add all sorts of effects. Again, click and hold, change clock resolution. In my opinion, 12 is the best, and then multiply the clock you are using, and then everything should work. So the next one is from Joy. Hi Joy, your videos are my go-to resource for VCVs and started messing around with software. Perfect. My main musical output has been rock metal, but I've fallen in love with the world of modular music because it's more fun to make indeed. Do you have any advice on working with VCV in a DAW setup or just composing electronic music in general? So I'm not using a DAW for composing music. I'm using Reaper for mixing, and I'm using Bitwig for recording my modular and adding modulation and stuff like this. But I'm not really using it for composition. I'm not arranging. I'm not creating stuff in the DAW or stuff like this. So I'm not so sure if I can help you with this. But composing electronic music, I guess you also mean in a DAW. So something that can really, I don't know, something that can really be fun. And something that I find important with electronic music is getting out of the loop, working horizontally instead of vertically, right? Usually, not usually, but many times you see people compose in a loop, basically, vertically. They add more and more and more inside a 4, 8, or 16 bar loop, and they just add more and more instruments, more and more voices, and then they spread them out, and this is the composition. I think it's much more fun to work in a linear way, in a horizontal way, having an arc to your music, composing live, and this is the fun thing about modular, composing in real time, because music is working on the axis of time, right? If there is no time, there is no music. If you stop time, there is no music. Music needs the time, right? All the time. This is also why I'm not really working in the DAW, because all this stop, play, pause, copy, paste, all of this is not, in my opinion, it's not really related to music. I mean, there are enough people out there that are making amazing, beautiful, crazy, insane music in a DAW. I'm just saying what works for me and what doesn't work for me. So I think working linearly, working in a horizontal way of thinking, not vertical, not loops, but horizontal, and thinking about an arc for your piece, I think it can be much more effective in electronic music. And also the fact of letting go, I guess, especially if you're in a DAW, don't, in a DAW, you can just go and micro adjust everything. And also it's very visual. You look at it and you see, here there is a block missing visually, you don't even have to listen. You see, here there is something missing visually. Maybe I will add another loop there, or I will add another voice there. Maybe try and bring the visual aspect down a bit. Try looking less at how things look like and more how they sound like. And and work more in a sort of a letting go mindset. And another thing that this is actually more related to VCV is try and take advantage of the amazing tools and sequencers that are available in VCV to create ideas quickly, then record them into your DAW, if it's Ableton, if it's Bitwig, if it's Logic, if it's Cubase, record them into your DAW, and then try and find those fun places, those fun sounds, those fun, actually don't even record sounds, record MIDI, record basically the sequence, the so-called the virtual voltage, and then afterwards work on sound design. So record the sequences, use randomness in your advantage and record it, and then take like a slice of it and see what happens, and then start working on the sound design maybe. Yeah, and that's it, I guess. The next one is from Mundelator. Hi. In the last plateau sound design video, you are using CV as audio. What are the do's and don'ts to keep the speakers safe? So first of all, in VCV Rack and in Eurorack, everything is voltage. Everything is control voltage. Also, audio is control voltage. So just wanted to mention this. You can also use audio as CV. And CV, if it runs at a certain rate, can also be audio. Now, another thing is, and I'm sure everyone already has these days a so-called professional audio interface. I'm pretty sure that in most cases, the speaker's output and the headphones output are not DC coupled, which means that they will have a filter built in that will filter out control voltage, CV, DC signals like pitch, like slow moving LFOs and stuff like this. So they will not even reach your speakers, and they will not even reach your headphones, right? In most cases, I'm pretty sure this is the case. So this is also something you don't really have to worry about. I'm using most of the time gates and triggers and stuff like this as audio. Also in hardware in Eurorack, this is quite fun. I never had any issues with using stuff like this. Of course, I had always to watch the levels because control voltage, especially in hardware, can be quite loud and can hurt your ears more than your speakers, which is quite dangerous, I guess. So always make sure that before you use control voltage, make sure that you have low levels and that you will not hurt your hearing or also your hardware, your speakers and stuff like this. So basically, again, I think most, if not all of the audio interfaces today are professional, and they have AC coupled outputs for speakers and headphones, which means that they will filter out DC signals, they will filter out slow moving LFOs and stuff like this. And also usually, again, I'm using triggers and gates, which are basically pulse waves. Sometimes I will make sure, just as it's just good practice, I make sure that they are bipolar and not unipolar, right? If you are using a clock, for example, usually it will be unipolar. So sometimes I will offset it, if I remember, if I'm not too lazy at the moment, right? I will offset it so it will be bipolar. Sometimes I process sound, I process audio with something like a comparator, for example, which will turn them into unipolar gates. It will turn the audio into unipolar gates. So usually if I'm not too lazy at the moment, or I'm not too in the zone, as they say, I will offset it so it will be negative, positive 5 volts. But I think experimentation is always nice. Use gates, use triggers. I saw a video once, and I still have to try this, of someone mixing audio with an LFO, and then the LFO pushes the audio up and down, and this creates all sorts of nice crunchy effects. So the most important thing is keeping the levels low, because hurting your hearing is much more serious than hurting your speakers or headphones. So always keep low levels when you are working in hardware or when you are working in VCV Rack, just to keep your hearing and your ears safe, because this is the most important, I guess. And experiment and have fun. Okay, so this one is again from Thomas. Hi again, Thomas. I have another question. Can you please share your suggestion on this? What CV I can use to switch between patterns, for example, on Polygene or of rare breeds? I want to change hits value, but let's say between two values, 8 hits and 10 hits. So I'm thinking what kind of CV we should use for this. So I love using the ADDR sequencer. Basically, it's a sequencer, but it's great also for modulation and for sequencing other sequences. In the right-click menu, you can choose the range you want, which you can choose for pitch, you can choose for modulating a filter, and you can use also for modulating a sequencer. Right, so using a sequencer to sequence another sequencer is always fun. Here I have Polygene sequencing Opulus. Right, for now it has 2 hits out of 12. If I change this to 8, it will sound like this. Right, and then 10. Right, and I want to move between them, right? I want to sequence this basically. So CV can come, this control voltage can come from a sequencer. In this case, again, I will use the ADDR sequencer. And what I can do, I have a few options to clock it. Just because it says clock input doesn't mean I have to use a clock module, right? So I can use a clock, for example, divided by 4, but I can also use the end of cycle output. So each end of cycle will move it one step forward, right? And then let's say that I want to go step by step and see exactly what I want to sequence. So let's say I want step 1. I will go and change this to 1 steps, right? And then step 1 will be 2 hits, step 2, and then I can offset this and move to step 2, right? I want this to be, and let's connect it, of course, also to the hit CV input. I want this to be 8, right? So I just go, right? Turn the knob until I reach the value I want. This is step 2. If I move to step 3, I want this again to have 2 steps or 2 hits. And step 4, I want to have 10. So I just go and I move this. And then I turn this back to step 1 and I set, in this case, 4 steps. Right? Right, and like this you can sequence the length, you can sequence the shift, you can sequence everything that has a CV input, you can sequence with another sequencer. And again, I love using the ADDR sequencer. It has also an expander, so you can have more than 8 steps. You can have 16, you can have 24, 32, or 36 or 32, never mind, you can change how many steps you want. And again, just because it says clock input, you don't have to use a clock. You can also use a clock. Let's see what happens when I use a divided by 4 clock. Right, it also works. So you can use also a clock module, you can use end of cycle triggers, you can use another sequencer to trigger this sequencer. Right, you can do all sorts of crazy things, but really I recommend using the ADDR sequencer. It's small, it's flexible, and it's perfect because it has so many ranges. It's perfect for sequencing other sequencers. Here I have another example. I have here Tremor 2, right? I'm sequencing it with the octet sequencer from Count Modular, and again I have the ADDR sequencing the steps of pattern A, right? Right. So I get variations. Here I have another example with the Sec3. Again, the ADDR is sequencing, in this case, the number of steps. If it has a CV input, why not? And this is sequencing the FM operator. Right, and you can see also here I'm using the sort of end of cycle or start of cycle output to clock this ADDR. Right, so you can create variation, you can create sort of patterns if you want. You can use also longer clock divisions to have sorts of songs and stuff like this. Again, the patch will be available on Patreon, and I hope this was helpful. Okay, so again, we have two questions that are more or less similar. The first one is from Marcus. Hi, Marcus. I discovered that randomizing inside the modules with Command R can create cool effects and sounds, for example, in Plateau and in Opulus. Maybe you can show some modules where randomizing can be cool. And the next one is from CP Geisen. Hi. Is there a way to trigger the ability to randomize the module settings, or is that a function of the VCV software? So I have something for both of you. First of all, just like this, you cannot randomize with a trigger, right? In the right-click menu, if you randomize something, where is it? Control R, right? You cannot do this with a trigger, but there is a module from Strumming there, of course. I will put a link also to where you can get, it's still not in the library, where you can get the Strumming collection, which is called strip. Now with strip, you can randomize things with the trigger. All you have to do is put the strip module next to the module you want to randomize, but only next to it. Don't put anything next to the module itself, because then it will randomize it as well. So you need space right between the modules. So keep this in mind. Then you click the arrow here, so it will point in the direction of the module you want to randomize. Then here there is the randomize section. So first of all, you can right click it and change the mode to exclude or include, which means that the parameters you select will be excluded or will be included. I have it set to include, which means that now I can start including steps. So let's see something like this. Let's unmute this voice, which is basically FM operator being sequenced by the ADDR sequencer. It has 8 steps, and let's say that I want step 2. I just click here, you see it turns red, and then I click the what I want to randomize. So step 2, step 5, step 6, let's say, and step 8, right? So they will be now included when I randomize. I can do this with a button. Right, and you can see only they are being randomized. And I can do this, of course, also with the clock. So I have here a clock divided by 8. And maybe take this an octave up. Right, so you have some stability, but some notes will always change. Again, the strip module, you right click, you choose exclude or include, and then you click and learn what you want or what you don't want. Right, quite an amazing module. Right, so this is first of all how you can randomize things in VCV, right? And then what to randomize, other stuff to randomize. It's always fun to randomize like this hardware, right? That don't have CV inputs for everything. So for example, here I have Troika. There are no CV inputs for the waves and for the switches, but still you can randomize them and get really interesting results. The same with the stereo strip from DivKid and Befaco, right? There are no CV inputs for the EQ, but it's always fun to randomize this. Right, just for fun. And then I have here also a bass and a kick drum. By the way, Tremor 2 is also quite fun to randomize. So let's see what happens there. Opalach. Bass and kick drum. Right, now I'm just going to hit Control R and let's see what happens. Oh yeah, I'm going to leave it at this. You see, just randomizing Tremor 2 can be also fun with Control R and getting interesting results. And of course, you can automate this also with the strip module. Again, links in the description or on Patreon to where you can get this collection. So this one is from Cole. Hi Cole, when would you use an exponential VCA instead of an exponential envelope? I look at the exponential knobs on MI mutable instruments veils and I rarely ever touch them unless I'm turning them up way up and offsetting the signal so I can bring up line level signals to your rack. So with envelopes, I mean, if you don't have a choice of an envelope like the ADSR, right, there is no, also in the right-click menu, there is no way to change it between linear and exponential. I guess it will always be exponential. Right, so now it will sound like this. Right, it's going through, I believe this is also veils, right? Yes, this is also veils with an exponential VCA. Right, and you get one response if I change this to linear, right? Because I cannot change it to linear on the envelope itself. Right, you see the result is a bit different. Right, so basically when you don't have the choice on the envelope, I guess this can make a change. But what happens when you don't use an envelope? Right, what happens when you use something like an LFO to open the VCA, right? So here I have a sine wave, again, going to the VCA, and I have a sine wave LFO opening this VCA. You can see the original LFO here on the scope. I'm not using an envelope, I'm using an LFO, and this will also change the response of the LFO, right? So if I bring down the sine wave, you see what happens. It starts slowly, exponentially, and ends logarithmically, right? But if I change this to linear, it will have the whole effect of the LFO. Right? It will sound totally different. Right, so I guess you can use the exponential linear, first of all, if you don't have an envelope that you can change it on the envelope itself, and also when you don't use an envelope, when you use something like an LFO or other signals that you want to change their response. So this one is from Joe. Hi Joe, what do you do when you need more clock modulation than clock provides? Do you have a go-to divider multiplier? So usually for clock divisions, I'm using this clock divider from Count Modula. I find it quite easy to use, quite intuitive, and quite just put it and it's there for me. And you have a few different divisions, right? So you can do 2, 4, 8, 16. You have also 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you have 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and so on. And of course, you can use a couple of them in series and have them even more divided. But if you are using clocked and you need more clocked, you can just use another clocked. And because you can chain them, and this is quite easy, right? So if you right click the main clock you want to use, and you under auto patch, you have this as the master or the main clocked, right? And then you go to the second one you want to add because you need more multiplications and divisions, right? And you go to auto patch and you connect to master, right? It will automatically connect them and they will be synced, right? You have 133, 133, and then you have here divisions and multiplications, and here you have even more, and you can continue like this and chain them. Of course, this will work also with the mini version of clocked. Again, you set one to be the master and the second one to auto patch to connect, and then again they will be synced. You just have to reset the main one once, so they will start also at the same time. And this will work also with the combination. So for example, your main clocked is the big clocked, and the secondary one that you want to use more multiplications and division is the smaller one. So the main one will be the master, and the smaller one will be connect to master, and like this. And you can like this continue and connect even more, right? Connect, you can have many more and as many as you want divisions and multiplications. Just remember to reset the main one once, and then everything will work in sync. The next one is from Chris. Hi Chris, I'd like to see if it's possible to split polyphony out as you did with the Hocketing video, so I can get harmonizing to happen between the voices. So yes, you can just use the split modules module from VCV, for example, and split the polyphonic signals into monophonic ones that you can spread out through different voices, right? So here I have chords coming from the note sec, and I split once the, let me do this again. the pitch information, and once I split the gates, right? And this is going through different voices. So one note is going to the FM operator, right? With tap dancer, another note is going to plats through plateau, and another voice is going through another plats. Right, so now those are 3 channels of polyphony going each channel to a different voice. But there's another thing you can try, and this is much more fun. I have here exactly the same here up, right? It's exactly the same. But now instead of using the polyphonic triggers as well, I will use just the pitch, and I will use triggers from a different sequencer, from a trigger sequencer, and this can yield really interesting results. Right? And then like this, you still split the harmony through different voices, but the rhythms change. Right, now if you just want to split polyphonic signals with a switch like I did in the Hocketing video, the switch from VCV is also polyphonic, right? So you can do this with the switch from VCV as well, but I think it's much more fun to split it with a split module and then have control over the individual voices, or the triggering of the individual voices and so on. So the next one is from Free of Genre. Hi, I was wondering if you would share your thoughts, suggestions in regards to a minimalist fixed track for the purpose of exploring practicing on a smaller system within VCV that could translate well into budget-friendly entry point into hardware purchases. 3U 84 HP for a strict minimalist track, or maybe 6U 168 HP for a system to grow into. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the support. So I have some things ready here. So this is, how much was it? 84 HP. So this is 84 HP. I went a bit overboard just because clouds is a bit big, but you have here everything you need for experimentation. You have Max Slicer and Rampage. This duo, this combination is amazing. I have them both in hardware. They are really nice. They are working amazingly together. And you can also DIY them. So you can order them for quite an affordable price and build them your own if you want. And anyway, Befaco is not the most expensive modules out there. You don't need one, but I like to have a quantizer just so I can stay in scale. And then you have one simple oscillator that you can experiment with, and another one's a bit more complex, a bit more maybe percussive if you want. Doesn't have to be percussive. You will see I made also something on modular grid. You will see this in a second. And the mixer, right? And some sort of effect. I chose clouds because it has delay, it has reverb, it has granular. So this can be a nice end of chain sort of effect if you need one, and it can also be not only end of chain, and you can also experiment with it. And again, I prepared something on modular grid, something more or less similar. So again, Max Slicer and Rampage, I think this duo is amazing. Again, a tuner, you don't need one, but this one is small, 2 HP, so why not? Let's see if I can zoom in a bit. A simple, more or less simple oscillator, the STO for Make Noise, quite affordable. So many different things you can do with it. It's quite an amazing module. And another one a bit more complex. This is the Basimilus Iteratus Alter from Noise Engineering. I have it also in hardware, and it's not only kick drums, it's not only percussive, you can get noise out of it, you can get melodic voices out of this, lots of modulation possibilities, lots of playability, which is also important in such a small system. Quad VCA when you need VCAs, and a mixer because it can also mix. Also the mixer in VCV can also be a VCA. And in this case there is the microcell, which is a Clouds clone. I also have it in hardware. I love it. It's amazing. I find it much more fun and nicer than Clouds. Yes. So this was it. And of course, you will need some sort, you don't really, it's not like you 100% need it, but some sort of an output module to take the audio out of your system. I guess you can also do this directly from microcell. Or from a different effects module, just watch your levels. But I guess that the best would be using an output module. This one also, it's also from Befaco. and it also has a headphones output, which is always useful. And there's another variation going full-blown mutable instruments. After later audio are doing lots of mutable instruments clones because they are not, most of them are not available anymore. And they are amazing for smaller systems because they are quite small and compact. So you have marbles, so you have the marbles clone, you have the clouds clone, right? And you have oscillators, you have modulation, you have a filter, you have rings, right? You have tides, which is perfect for modulation. You have a mixer. This one is from Nano because it's quite a nice mixer. And again, the output module, right? So you can experiment in VCVREC with this setup here and see if it works for you. And then go and look at hardware stuff. If you want something bigger, so again, this is the same HP, but just 2 rows, so 6U. First of all, I left space, and this is something I always recommend. Leave space because you never know what comes out all of a sudden and you need it, or other stuff that are missing and you need, and then you have no space and you start selling and buying and selling. So always leave some space just in case. And here what I have is I have a bit more of a complex sequencer because we can afford the space now, right? It has 4 channels you can use in hardware, something like René maybe for make noise, although it's not so affordable, or other sequencers that are out there, right? Then a mixer, a CV mixer, then a wave folder, then envelope, a quad envelope generator or function generator. There are many, not many, but there are a few in hardware as well. Again, a mixer, VCA. Then you have space for effects, dedicated effects, which I find much more interesting because you can control them separately and mix and modulate them and all sorts of things. Then 2 voices, right? 2 oscillators, let's say one more simple, one a bit more complex, whatever this means. A filter, there is a space for filtering, and noise plethora from Befako for lots of experimental or not only experimental noise. And if you have the space, I know most of them are not really affordable, but when you have the space, maybe something like a sampler or something like Morphogene or something like I don't know, a different way to mangle samples and to record sounds from your system into it and mangle them in all sorts of ways. And again, this is just the output module if you need one. No CV there, but it can be interesting to mix everything also in VCVREC. So these are the systems I built. You can experiment with them. I will attach also the pictures of from the modular grid things that I built, so you can have a look. And I hope this was helpful. So the next question is coming from Tonko. Hi Tonko. I would like to ask if there is any equivalent to the slop module from Triggerfish in VCV2, or even better, how to recreate its functionality with other modules. Thank you and kind regards. Thank you so much. Okay, so yes, there is DriftGen or DriftGen from Lifeform modular that will add sort of drift to your oscillators. You send the pitch to the input, then from the output to your oscillator, and then you can change the rate and the depth. But there is also a fun way to create something like this by yourself. So here I have a simple voice. I have oscillator, filter, some modulation of the filter with an LFO, right? VCA envelope, a really simple patch basically, and a tap dancer just for some effects. It will sound like this. I can play it with the keyboard. Right, and now I want to add drift, I want to add movement. 2 ways I want to show you. First of all is with Walk from Bog Audio, which is smooth random voltage. So it's random, but it will go up and down smoothly and not in steps like sample and hold, for example. And this is perfect to add slow moving random modulation via the FM input, right? And just a bit, if I add too much, right, it just goes up and down all the time. But if you add just enough, right, you hear it's going up and down. And of course, this will be affected also by the rate. Right, so you can make this quite slow, and again, this might be a bit too much, maybe 0.39, let's say. Maybe just a tad more. Right, and you get some life in this oscillator just by adding smooth random voltage. Another thing you can try is adding noise, is sending noise to the FM input of the oscillator. This is also something I like doing. Try white noise, try pink noise. Let's try pink noise, for example. Listen to what it's doing. This is without the drift now. Right, and again, just a bit. Right, and of course you can also mix them. So I'm going to mix both now, the smooth random voltage and the pink noise. Right, let's open this here a bit and start mixing them. So this will be now the random voltage. No, this will be the noise. Not too much. Let's take out the delay for a second. Right, just a bit. And then the smooth random voltage again, not too much. Let's see, white noise. No, pink noise. Right, already it sounds a bit more organic. Let's bring back the delay. Yes, this sounds nice. I have here just something for context, like a sequence with a max slicer and psych and a filter. Of course, also this patch will be available. Yes, indeed. Smooth random voltage, noise, white, pink, red, whatever, experiment, fun. The next one is from Fick. Hi Fick, I'm addicted to Krell patching and got a bit bored of using Rampage. I was wondering if you could show a few more of your favorite function generators to create the same effect but with other variations, or perhaps you can propose more advanced Krell alternatives with probabilities and so on. So in hardware I used Rampage all the time, less with probability because it's already random more or less, so adding probability is not really I don't know, you don't really notice it, although I have chances also in hardware, and I did use it a few times just to add probability to the triggers, but the Krell itself is already more or less random. I did get two of these now, two knocks from Instruo, which I'm planning to not replace, but maybe use them. I have two, so I can use one and the other together like I use Rampage, but it has also a bipolar output that can be interesting, and it's just a different module. Maybe it can also be interesting to use instead of Rampage for this. So I'm going to experiment. Hopefully it will reach also VCV once. It's from Instruo. But also another thing that I like doing, instead of using function generators, I'm using an LFO, which will work more or less the same, but you cannot control the attack and the decay or fall and rise separately, but it will be just the LFO, but still it can work quite nicely. So instead of using function generators, you can use an LFO, and it will work more or less like this. You use the square output as your clock, as the end of cycle clock, like on Rampage. This will trigger a random module. It can be sample and hold. It can be other random modules that you have where they have a trigger input. And then this sample and hold will modulate the LFO rate via the FM input, right? So with each cycle of the LFO, the random will be triggered and will change the rate of the LFO, right? So you have a feedback loop. The LFO will trigger the sample and hold or the random module, and the random module will modulate its frequency, which will trigger the random, which will modulate the frequency, which will trigger the random, and so on and so forth. So you have a feedback loop. If you want to listen to this, I have here an oscillator going through some wave folding. So you can use the sine wave, you can use the triangle wave, you can use the saw wave. You can mix between them and get interesting results. So this will be the sine wave here. And if you need a trigger, you have the clock, basically the random, the generative clock from the square output, right? So this will trigger a sample and hold. Haha, with an LFO, and you can change the LFO rate to get something slower. And if you have two LFOs, you can also use two LFOs. Every another LFO will trigger another sample and hold, which will then modulate the frequency. And now you can mix them, right? You can mix two LFOs and get a unique result. Right? Right, so basically by creating a feedback loop, the LFO will trigger sample and hold, will trigger random, never mind sample and hold not, random modulate LFO, which will trigger, which will modulate, which will trigger, and so on and so forth. So this works really nicely also with LFOs, so you don't even have to use a function generator. Right, and you can mix all sorts of signals to modulate the LFOs. You can mix 2 or 3 or 4 LFOs together and get unique results. You can switch between shapes, amazing. Imagine you have the square output, the generative square output triggering a sequential switch that switches between the LFO shapes. So again, lots to explore also with LFOs. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. Okay, the last question is from Joe. Hi, Joe. How do you do your YouTube shorts? Do you film the screen with your camera, or are you using screencasting software to record the screen and water? I'm not so sure about the water. Maybe you mean the table, what I have on the table. But there are two ways that I do this. First of all, I use OBS in both ways. So once I will use OBS to record the screen, and I set OBS so it will record the resolution that needed for short, so I can exactly record what I want with OBS. And sometimes I will also record with the camera. I will point the camera to the screen and send this to OBS again with the exact resolution. Resolution I need for the YouTube shorts. I make sure that it's like less than 60 seconds. I have also a timer because sometimes I'm just playing around and it's like 3 minutes long. So I have a timer for 60 seconds that I know, okay, time is up, stop recording. So yeah, sometimes I will use OBS just to record the VCV rec, and sometimes I will use a camera, depends on what I'm doing. Yeah, both cases OBS. Okay, that was it. Thank you again, Patreons, for your questions. Thank you again so much for your support. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, so thank you so much. And that's it. Come join our Discord for the challenges, for the giveaways. Cheers.